looking towards a MIP TV, deep into planning mode, and then lockdown happens. Production stops. So within a week and a half, I went from having 9 clients to having 1.5 clients. But the more I got to think about it, the more I realized that the wrong thing to do would be to sit around and wait for it all to come back. Took it all back to bare bones and thought, what have I got that I've built up over all these years when I'm sat here at home? A great black book that I'd built up over the years. And the thing I didn't have, but I got it within a couple of days, was a £100 microphone from Amazon. I figured, well, I'd seen the advent of podcasting and content creation. So I went for it and put some calls in and realized that people were really, really willing to speak, wanted to speak. It grew and grew really quickly, internationally.
You'd built this incredible premium PR business, and overnight you basically lost your whole business. Most other people did just sit there and feel sorry for themselves and, play Scrabble, whereas you actually did something about it, which I think sets you apart. Success in the media business doesn't happen overnight. It's a bumpy, complicated, high-stakes journey. It's all about staying alive whilst navigating the highs and lows. I know just how tough that can be because I lived through it for 16 years. My name's Sam Barcroft, and 2 decades ago, I started a business from my back bedroom in Tottenham. I built it into a global content company and finally sold up in 2021. Since then, I've been helping other entrepreneurs to scale their businesses. And one of the most important elements to success is the belief that anything is possible if you're truly committed. So, welcome to the Big Swing podcast, where each week we bring you inspiring behind-the-scenes business stories from highly successful content creators. We break down their remarkable careers into the 3 most pivotal moments, the big swings, that shape their future on the journey to success. Now you can learn just what's possible from these inspiring entrepreneurs and use the knowledge to shoot for the stars. It's time for the big swing. Today's guest is someone that I've had the privilege of working with for many years. Justin Crosby founded Boom Dialogue 13 years ago. Boom is a go-to international PR agency representing prestigious clients who produce and distribute award-winning television and video content across all genres. Justin successfully raised the profile of many companies, including my previous business, Barcroft Studios. And in 2020, when COVID decimated the TV industry, Justin bravely pivoted his business. Armed with a black book of TV's biggest names, he created Tellycast, a weekly TV industry news show podcast. And 3 years later, it's grown to become one of the world's most successful TV industry podcasts. But Justin didn't stop there. He grew Tellycast from a podcast into a franchise, including a newsletter, website, and more. In 2022, he realized the content industry was dying to get together and network in real life. So he launched 2 brand new sellout Tellycast events, which I was delighted to be a part of. But back in the day when we first met, Barcroft was still finding its feet. We knew we were on the cusp of taking that next big step, but nobody was noticing what we were up to. It's funny now, looking back at the first time we started collaborating. And I feel very lucky because obviously we've worked together on and off for quite a while. I was trying to remember this yesterday when we actually started working together. I'm going to call it 8 years. I don't know if it's a bit longer than that.
Yeah, I think it might be 8 years. It was when you were in a relatively small office in East London, and I remember it very clearly. Sitting in the corridor, waiting to be called in for the meeting.
That's right, and we were above a Tesco Express in Hackney, and I remember sitting in that very posh-looking reception that kind of covered up all our floors upstairs, and having a brilliant chat with you about how we can position our business for success moving forward. And, obviously our work together speaks for itself. I could tell Justin had a deep understanding of the world of content and knew how to shine a light on great shows. But it was his early career that set him up with this deep knowledge. He actually started off in a band, but swapped the life of a musician for a day job in the management company who looked after them. Within months, he was travelling the road as a tour manager, and after a whirlwind global tour, Justin stepped back into the office and began shaping his craft in marketing, press and branding. And so began Justin's rise in the world of public relations as he carved out his path toward becoming a PR guru.
I spent most of my career up to my early 20s in Yorkshire, where I'm from. And then I got a job at EMI Records to come and do marketing for them, and worked for them for a couple of years. And then after that, I had the opportunity to move more into marketing, purely into marketing and PR. And yeah, I started working for a number of different agencies, from small, very small boutique youth marketing agencies who were dealing with things like I worked with on the first Xbox launch. I worked with Activision and lots of really cool video gaming brands. And so for a few years, I was really focused on the consumer PR aspect of that.
As Justin's career progressed, the accounts he was looking after got bigger and bigger. A major stepping stone for him was working for the UK's leading TV and entertainment PR agency, Taylor Herring, setting up their brand division.
The last sort of piece in my experience puzzle that I wanted to fill was a little bit more corporate brand work. And so I started working for a big US PR agency called Manning, Selvage and Lee, who ran the Philips Electronics account globally, which covered all sorts of things from healthcare to lighting. Yeah, it was a really big gig. It was looking after a team of 30 people dedicated just working on the Philips account globally. So, that was a really great opportunity to work with the bosses of their internal communications department and really understand how a big organization worked and how you influence how a brand is perceived.
It's really interesting to me because it sounds to me like that would have been where very many people would have been perfectly happy to continue in that type of existence. I'm sure you have been really well looked after with a nice package and got a whole team scurrying around doing what you're asking them to do. What made you move away from that towards starting your Boom PR, your very own business?
Well, one of the things that I really learned was, it was fantastic being, towards the top of the pyramid in terms of running this big team and working with clients and managing clients. I was more and more involved with the theory and being a manager than actually doing anything that I really enjoyed doing, which was making a difference. So there's a number of things happened at that point. I mean, it was something that I was really wanting to build my own agency after I'd had a couple of chances to go on my own in my career up to that point. And I turned them down because I didn't think I was ready.
Well, it's really interesting though, Justin, isn't it? Because it's a massive thing for founders and potential founders, that feeling of, right, now's the time to press the button. I'm ready. This is the one. This is the perfect moment to step away. How did you know you were ready?
Well, I knew I was ready. I felt I was ready. Again, serendipity played, I think, a part in the next decision because the count was up for review. And also there was the big recession of 2008. So a whole load of marketeers right across industry decided not to spend any money. So there was a lot of changes were happening at the agency. I just figured at that point I'd had 2 or 3 years working on that piece of business. It was time to move on. And then it was a case of, well, if I don't go on my own now, I never will. It's now a case of I feel I'm ready. I've got all of the experience. And so, I started in the middle of a recession. I wouldn't recommend that. I figured there've got to be opportunities out there. I've got loads of contacts. Let's see how that works. And it was hard yards, I tell you, to begin with. The first 6 months was really difficult. But I did, got small, little contracts that came in and which were, great because there were old clients I'd worked with before who trusted me with their business, and it was maybe something that I couldn't have taken on in where I was before. And that laid really the foundation for me doing what I'm doing now. And what I do now is working with great creators of content, the business of selling content, and they're making great TV shows or drama series or short form content, and it's really helping them build their business through doing that. And
so you founded Boom, Justin, and off you go. How did you decide to concentrate initially on TV and games and music and like, how did that come about? Because you've just come out of a big consumer goods / industrial electronics account, and I'm sure you've been doing a few other food and drink and all the rest of it. So what made you decide that Boom was going to specialize in content? Because that's your first big swing, right? Deciding that Boom was going to be a content PR agency, right?
yeah, well, again, it connected everything that I was passionate about, which was about creation and creativity. I still get that rush and that buzz when you working with a creative and you see what they're doing and you see the potential for it, and helping them build awareness of that makes a tangible difference is something that's what I'd been missing for years. And you can tangibly have an impact on their business, and there's nothing better than that. And working with, like, we worked together for a number of years, seeing that progression over a period of time is really rewarding. And if you can make a business out of doing something that's rewarding and enjoyable and fun and work with nice people.
What were the stakes then when you set up Boom PR and chose to go down the content route? You had a lot to lose, didn't you? What could you have done differently that might have been an option for you at that point, do you think?
Well, the content business was one of the areas that I was working on in the first year. And I started to work also with video games companies. And again, more the creative youth marketing. But the content creators that I was working with, that side of the business really started to build and build and build through recommendation. And that was a case of, well, this is something that I'm definitely leaning into this. This is great. Again, it's something that's really enjoyable. It's very niche, because what I do is business to business content. In the content industries, there's only a handful of people do what I do, really, certainly in the UK.
That is a big swing to decide to focus on an area that's fairly limited in its overall market size. Was it quite tough at the beginning to convince production companies and game studios to spend money on PR?
Yeah, it was. And what I realized was I'm fishing in quite a small pond, and there's only certain size fish that are potentially there to be caught. In the sense of, you go to super indies and the bigger companies, they've got internal infrastructure, they've got internal PR departments. Whereas at the other end of the scale, you've got some very small businesses with very limited funds. So you've got to make a judgment whether or not that's something that you can do, because otherwise you can just have 10 clients working for very small amounts from every one, and you end up being incredibly busy but not making any money.
As Boom's reputation grew, Justin quickly found his niche.
So it was really a sweet spot of businesses of a certain size with ambition, but also with creativity. And they tended to be, most of these companies were brilliant companies run by very creative and entrepreneurial executives who understood that they needed to grow, and understood one of the key things that is going to help them grow was building their reputation and their awareness with buyers all around the world. And that was the thing. Global is very important to what I do. I don't work domestically really for any client. It's always about the global selling of content and businesses.
And what's really brilliant about how you work, Justin, is, well, two key things for me. One of them is how strategic you are, and how, as a CEO and a founder, when we worked together, you weren't just there putting out press releases when we had a new show going to air. You'd actually work with us, and you did over many years, helping us think about our end goals, helping us figure out how we could create a brand. And so your big skill, I think, and what set you apart was really your strategic approach, coupled with very good delivery, of course, but then also how focused you were on personal relationships. Did you deliberately take that approach Or was that more organic? All of a sudden, I'd see you working for lots of different really successful businesses.
I think it was two things, really. First of all, when you're working in a niche, you have to excel in it. You have to be the best. So the personal relationships thing, which is the second part, you have to invest in that. And sometimes you need to invest into how you can deliver the best possible results for your clients, which might mean traveling to various different markets and learning and understanding not only what your clients were doing and how the process of buying and selling content and businesses worked in the TV industry, and understanding how you can help make a journalist's job easier and give them more reason to write about your clients. So for me, it was almost about being a content creator for the trade media, understanding how to spin my clients off of my client's story and get them incorporated into what they might be already writing about. So I think it was about, two things. It's about personal relationships. You have to invest in that. And sometimes, there were a number of trips I flew out to LA and flew out to various different international markets. Obviously, very nice places to go and a lot of fun doing it, but quite expensive. You're talking about $5,000 a trip to go out there. And my aim was always to come back and cover my costs with a new client. So that's quite a motivator to get out there and meet people and network and again understand their businesses. And that's, I think, one of the reasons why the company grew so quickly was I was often there, really.
You showed up, Justin. You definitely showed up, and you'd be the first person there and the last person to leave. So I think that's pretty amazing. I remember one stage you were kind of fighting with yourself. You had so many brilliant stories that you were putting out that you kind of were having to organize them to actually get them in the publications when you needed them. It's a real statement of your success that the editors of Variety and, Broadcast and all these Deadline and everything else were probably desperate to get a call from you because you'd really understood what they needed to get their clicks and their subscribers happy. You also understood what the indie bosses really wanted to see in Variety, see themselves in. I remember when we were working together really well, we'd almost just talk headlines with each other. How do we figure out how to grow the company via the headline that we'd like to see in Variety magazine? And I used to use that to actually reverse engineer our tactics at work so that we'd produce the content that would get into Variety and would make that buzz, which I credit you with teaching me how to do for sure.
Well, but that's really smart, Sam. I think because of your media background, you understood the value of a great story. And the thing about the international content industry, it's remarkable. It's really unique in the sense that there are more trade media dedicated to this sector than any other creative industry sector. Around the world, there are around about 25 trade media titles just dealing with TV. And there may be different genres. Some may be international, some may be domestic, but there are many, many ways to tell your story across lots of different channels. And it's about understanding who reads each of those channels and how to build your story through each of those in a way that builds a narrative for a business.
You're helping these people not just to sell their shows, but to sell themselves and their competencies, which is super helpful to people who aren't very good usually at telling their own stories. And by this stage, Justin, you've got a whole book of brilliant clients. You've probably got lots more people that want to work for you. I'm talking about kind of 2019. You're flying around to all these brilliant events. All your clients are winning awards. You've got the editors of all these big publications on the end of the phone wanting more and more of your content. That's super satisfying your clients. And then things took a bit of a turn, didn't they?
Yeah, they did. They took a big old downturn. And obviously with this thing called COVID that appeared coming over the horizon in 2019, I remember being in a situation where we had 9 clients looking towards a MIP TV, planning about 4 weeks out, making sure that all the stories are going to drop at the optimum time and what are the stories that's coming in from this client, and deep into planning mode. And then lockdown happens, production stops. So within a week and a half, I went from having 9 clients to having 1.5 clients. And that was obviously unprecedented, from being around and traveling around, doing all the networking, to then being, right, you're stuck indoors like everybody. But it was a case of, well, when's it all coming back? What's next? How long's this going to last? Oh, it'll just be a month, people were saying, or it'll be, be a couple of weeks. And then very soon, everybody realized that no, we're kind of in for the long haul.
How did it make you feel?
I felt powerless in one way. My immediate thought was how nobody could influence what was going on. Not being able to leave your house and being told by the government not to leave your house. It almost felt like some dystopian nightmare for a time. But the more I got to think about it, the more I realized that the wrong thing to do would be to sit around and wait for it all to come back.
Interesting.
It was not an option to me.
Nearly all of Justin's hard-won business collapsed overnight as COVID swept the world. But this forced him to pivot and set in train his next big swing.
Yeah, so the next big swing was starting a podcast, and took it all back to bare bones. So what have I got that I've built up over all these years when I'm sat here at home? Well, I've got an internet connection. I've got a great list of contacts through clients, through broadcasters, through distribution companies, a great black book that I'd built up over the years. And the third thing I didn't have, but I got it within a couple of days, was a £100 microphone from Amazon. And I had all this free information online as to how you start your own podcast. And I figured, well, this would be a fun thing to do. And so I figured, I've got no excuse now, why don't I do that thing that I've been wanting to do and thinking about doing? So I went for it and put some calls in and realized that people were really, really willing to speak, wanted to speak, and everybody wanted to not only have that human connection, but try and figure out what impact it was going to have on various different parts of the business. And that's how the podcast started to take shape, and the discussions that we had, and it grew and grew really quickly, internationally. And that's the great thing about podcasting. It's free. The distribution is amazing, or the opportunity to distribute it is amazing. Again, it's free to get it out there to people and for people to discover it. So that was where I started to spend a bit of my time.
It's amazing, Justin, because in a way, you'd built this incredible premium PR business, mostly in television and content. And overnight, you basically lost your whole business. Wasn't it very scary to go from being the secret source behind all these businesses, the person that everyone knew but nobody really ever heard from, like the Prime Minister's spokesman, really, to putting yourself out there as Justin Crosby, kind of host and producer of your own brand? How did you not wobble over that?
Yeah. Once I decided to myself, right, I'm going to go for this, there was definitely a kind of an emotional barrier to overcome, because I just thought, what if I made a complete plonker of myself? And who's interested in what this guy's got to say anyway? It was about me being a conduit to hear what a lot of other people had got to say, and people that have got opinions has got to say. And that was always the focus. Coming to grips with that imposter syndrome of, who do you think you are doing this? And once I did the first one, and I learned so much. That first month, I learned so much, but I had all the time in the world to learn it, and that was a great thing. But the response that I was getting from people was fantastic, because I started getting emails from producers in France and all over the world, just saying, this is like a lifeline, because it gives us some perspective. That was really fascinating to me, and people seemed to really enjoy it, which was brilliant. And it built and built, and then I started to interview other people who were not necessarily content creators or involved in the content industry, but they were involved in the wider aspect of business. So it's all of those aspects that were relevant right across business, and people that are experts in those areas as well. And it just became a sort of it's quite an interesting sort of library. I flick back on it now and again, and
well, it's legacy for you, isn't it, Justin? Because that will live forever on a digital cloud somewhere. And all those important conversations are now a part of history, really, aren't they? And it must really feel weird to look back and realize that big event that was so upsetting and frustrating when it happened actually turned out really well, because it helped expand your business brilliantly, didn't it? But just not in the way that you'd expected it.
That's right. That's right. And as business started to come back, which was actually weirdly in the August of that year, and production started again, and I guess a lot of listeners or a lot of producers who'd been listening to the show got in touch about, we're wanting to start doing some PR now, and people discovering the fact that I did PR, and that's still happening today. Really, is that I getting discovered by people, producers from all over the world. So you're right. I thought, maybe this is something that we'll get some advertising for, and it'll maybe cover its costs. I never thought that it would be a cash cow or something that I could just focus on. But the benefit really did come through approaches and recommendations from lots of new businesses that I'd never met.
And then kind of what that's led into is really establishing Tellycast as its own brand, which is the name of the podcast. And you've gone from really being a behind the curtain publicist to now being a publicist that people have really heard of around the world in television, and being kind of seen as best in class. And then your next big swing really was to take that brand and post everybody being in lockdown, to bring everybody back together in person. Do you want to tell us about your next big swing?
Again, one of the things that I figured, exactly as you say, that everybody had been indoors for so long, and people were yearning for the big markets to come back.
The world began to come back to life again, and for Justin, key television conferences like MIP TV in Cannes resurfaced. And strolling the Croisette, Justin discovered he had unknowingly become a podcast star. 5 seasons and 128 episodes of Tellycast later, he found himself frequently being stopped by listeners who recognised him from the Tellycast podcast artwork. And it was these continual positive indicators that once again got the entrepreneurial wheels turning for Justin.
It got me thinking about events, and it got me thinking about how could we build that into a live event that is not something that is competing with any of the other established big industry events, but it complements them, and it lives in its own space. And so I figured that those sort of events needed to be small and niche, but quite detailed and go into a little bit of detail. And the first one that I established is the Tellycast Content Funding Festival, which happened at Lincoln's Inn in April. 2022 was the first one. And it was basically an event where we just looked at the challenges that producers and, other people within the content industry ecosystem had when it comes to the model of, just expecting to get a commission from Channel 4 and everything's great.
And Justin, did you have the same feelings when you were setting that up about imposter syndrome, as you say, and everything that you had when you were doing the podcast? Was it a kind of a round two?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it was like, I think if you can create something that you figure looks pretty good on paper, then it's like making it work. And then it's putting down the big venue deposit and go, right, well, put your money where your mouth is, Yeah, it was really quite scary. It's like, well, what if nobody turns up?
And with the success of his debut event under his belt, Justin decided to double down and launch the Tellycast Digital Forum in London. He built the first UK event to bring together digital-first producers, content creators, and studios for a day dedicated to discussing the social video industry. But just like before, the doubt crept in as to whether anyone would sign up.
It is quite terrifying. It's like putting on a gig and nobody coming. And I was putting on the tickets on sale, did all my publicity, all the digital marketing. I was thinking all the assets that I need. What would I do for another client if I was working for them? So you're like, right, okay, it's out there. And you just sat waiting for the first ticket to sell. And it's like, oh, okay, that's 24 hours. There's no tickets gone yet. But when you get the first ticket, that's brilliant. It's like, okay, that's validated. Somebody's willing to spend a fair amount of money. And also, what I would say is that I had some fantastic sponsors that were able to, that mixed model of having sponsors and tickets enabled it to make the tickets affordable, but still, after a lockdown, it's nobody's exactly flush with cash.
From what I can see and having been there, you absolutely smashed it with your third big swing.
The Tellycast Digital Content Forum, which was focused very much around content creators and digital first producers and studios and that whole ecosystem, which I felt didn't really have an event to bring that community together. And it's such a fast growing and exciting area that I figured that it was a little bit of a no-brainer. But again, you make assumptions at your peril, really. And I did a whole load of research and I figured that people were really ready for that sort of event. And Sam, I spoke to you about it and you said absolutely, it would be a great thing to do. So with that knowledge again, well, I know how to do events now. Let's do another one. And that's sold out. I'm doing that again. I'm doing both events again in 2023 and hopefully make them bigger and better and learn all the lessons that we did first time round.
I mean, now you're in this horrible situation where you've created a brilliant traditional PR company, an amazing podcast, and now you've branched out into events. Do you think that you're going to become a business in one of those verticals, or are you excited to carry on pursuing all of those business lines at once?
I think the latter. I'm absolutely dedicated to working with clients and helping them build their businesses. That's, I get an enormous amount of pleasure doing that and satisfaction. But certainly on the Tellycast side, then, that is something that is still got a long way to grow, I think. It's still very young and people are still listening to it and new people are coming to it all the time and discovering old episodes. And so I think there's a lot to do there. I've launched a new website and newsletter called The Drop, which is really a spin-off of the Digital Content Forum, which is really a newsletter for the digital first community and brand funded and people within that ecosystem. And that's going from strength to strength. So
doesn't sound like your entrepreneurial vigor is going to be reduced anytime soon.
There's nothing more exciting than doing something new. If you figure that there's a market for something, yeah, of course, you always may be wrong. But I think if you do enough research and you've got a gut feeling that's strong enough, and if enough people give you good advice, and that's a key thing, is speaking to people who are in the industry, who are experts, and say, would you buy this? Would you read this? Would you go to this? I just think it's really important to keep networking, keep talking to people. It's very easy for us in the world of WhatsApp and email and digital communication, everybody working from home, to recede into your own kind of bubble. And I think that's so important to break out of that as much as possible and get to town and see people and see the whites of people's eyes.
Now, before we get into which of Justin's big swings he felt was the most impactful, I want to tell you about next week's amazing guest. It's none other than the media legend that is Dawn Airy. Dawn's been in leadership roles in British broadcasting since the early 1990s, when she became ITV's first ever controller of children's and daytime programmes. She went on to be controller of arts and entertainment at Channel 4, and then she was the founding director of programmes at Channel 5. Then she became Channel 5 CEO. She went on to hold top posts at B-Sky B and ITV before pivoting to run a big chunk of Yahoo, and then became CEO of Getty Images in New York. These days, she's helping to guide women's football to greater popularity for the FA. She's chair of the board of the National Youth Theatre and a non-executive board member at Channel 4. That's just some of what she's up to. And needless to say, with so much experience, we had a special conversation geared to the lessons she'd learned that would be most helpful to you, our audience of media entrepreneurs. Dawn's energy, enthusiasm, and northern brass is incredibly infectious. It's a great conversation, and I can't wait to share it with you. Now, back to Justin. Which of his big swings did he feel was the most significant to his success? Was it number 1, focusing Boom on a specific niche of the broadcast content industry? Or was it swing number 2, pivoting into podcasting and creating Tellycast as a response to COVID? Or was it number 3, supersizing his brand into in-person events and creating a whole content ecosystem?
I think the second. I think basically, quietening the demons in your own mind and actually going ahead and raising your head above the parapet and going, right, I'm going to go for this. I think that's made the biggest difference, because that's laid the pathway for everything that I'm doing now in the event stuff, in the newsletter stuff. And it's made a difference to Boom as a business as well. So it's benefited in lots of different ways, which I never expected it to. And it's set me on a slightly different path. And it gives me an opportunity to still work with the clients that I love working for, and make that difference, and doing my own thing, and having your own IP. And that's really, I really enjoy having that as well. So working those two hand in hand would never have come if I hadn't done the podcast. So it would have to be number 2, I think.
Well, I think that's a brilliant answer, Justin, because what you've done with Tellycast in our content industry has been hugely influential, and a lot of people love it, and it's certainly inspired me to do what I'm doing now. So congratulations, and thank you so much for being a guest on this week's Big Swing podcast.
Thanks, Sam. I really enjoyed it. Thanks for having me on.
Well, that was my conversation with Justin Crosby. And it's just so nice to remember all the brilliant times we had together, both in the office in London, but also around the world, where Justin was never far away. When I was out there with the team, busy pitching people, whether it was in Hollywood, in Cannes, all over the place, Justin would never be very far away, keeping an eye on how people were telling our story and making sure all those important editors thought the world of what we were doing as a business and knew exactly what was coming next. He looked after our business in a way that I don't think anybody else could have done. And I think he was one of our closest collaborators over all of that time, and somebody that added such a lot of value to our business. And I value my relationship with Justin so highly. He's one in a million for sure. And I'm very, very proud and excited about what he's building with Tellycast. It's just so fantastic to see it going from strength to strength. And I had 3 big takeaways really from my discussion. Number 1, Justin was so clever because he really built a proper, varied, interesting career in PR and marketing. He was in music, he was in games, he was in television PR, he was in entertainment, he worked for a huge, big global corporate. He understood how to deal with everyone from bouncers in nightclubs of heavy metal venues in Europe, all the way through to understanding how to manage huge organizations in the boardroom at C-suite level. And he did all that before he set up and launched his own company. And that is so interesting. It meant that he really knew when he started taking on new clients for himself how to deal with different people. And he'd been in many of the situations that they were worried about or didn't have the experience of. He had a broad range of experience before he started his own company. And I think that is a really clever way to go. If you want to start your own company, go out there and work for lots of different people and figure out how you can learn from all those different situations, so that when it's time to go it alone, you're set up with a brilliant array of diverse and interesting and colourful knowledge, I would say. Do that before you start your business and you will have a much easier ride, because you won't have to learn on the job so much. Number 2, when he went alone, Justin found his niche pretty quickly. He realised that young entrepreneurial independent production company owners really needed to tell their story, but there wasn't anyone out there doing that effectively. And so he really doubled down, Justin, and figured out exactly the type of people that would be his key customers. And then he dominated that sector because he saw a gap in the market and he went for it. And he didn't go out there and try and build a general entertainment PR company. He went out there and found a niche in entrepreneurial indie owners and decided to own that niche. And that is really, really clever. And I would always encourage people to find a niche and dominate it. And number 3, there's a kind of rule out there, which is, if you're in professional services, if you're doing PR for big companies, for other people, what you don't do is become a content creator yourself, because you're kind of playing in their paddling pool all of a sudden. You're not kind of supporting them, you're potentially even competing with them. But sometimes You have to do what you have to do. And when you're building a brand and when you're building a business, you have to learn that you sometimes have to take risks and disrupt your own business model in order to survive. And when his clients all dropped away during COVID, Justin did the right thing. He climbed up the food chain from being a provider to being a publisher. And sometimes you have to take advantage of the way the market moves. And sometimes that happens at the lowest moment. That happens when everybody else is freezing and you're willing to make a move. And so Justin stayed alert, he stayed agile. When COVID hit, when lockdown happened, he saw the gap and he saw the opportunity. He went out there and started telling stories. And that, in the end, worked brilliantly for his existing business, because it meant that he had a way of helping his clients even more by making sure that he was a even more prominent publicist, and therefore people were even more interested in the stories he was putting out there in the world. So it turned out that it didn't cause a problem for his existing PR business, it actually supported it, and it became a flywheel effect where the publicity from the podcast was helping the publicity for his companies. Just so clever. So thank you, Justin, for appearing on the podcast, for all the support you gave me over the years, and for being just such a top man. Thank you. The Big Swing podcast is made in association with the fantastic Spirit Studios. Our executive producer is Fred Casella. Our episode producer is Lauren Avery. Our sound designer is Will Horrocks. And The Big Swing was created by me, Sam Barcroft. Please tell your friends all about it and subscribe to the podcast on your platform of choice.